Started. So this is number 3 in a 4-part series that Independent RX and Live Oak are doing together. We are fortunate enough to have a joint client of ours, Angelynn, on to teach us some stuff. So our next one, the last and final in the series, will be in early May. We'll be sending some communication out about that. It'll be primarily around real estate and buying the real estate. But today we're going to talk about buying the store that you work at. If you don't work at the store that if you're an attendee and you don't work there, this does have a lot of relevance just to buying a store in general. There's a lot of crossover there, but Angelynn was fortunate enough to buy the store that she was working at. So that's the angle we're going to take. There is a Q&A at the bottom. So if you want to ask questions, please do. We will answer those throughout the webinar, and we'll leave some time at the end just to finish off anyone that we haven't answered. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Owen Bondurant. I'm a partner in Independent RX. We are a company that helps people buy, start, and sell pharmacies, along with we have a full accounting service for independent pharmacies. I also own I'm a partner in 3 pharmacies here in Ohio. Angelynn, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Owen. Thanks so much, Owen and Greco, for having me today. It's good to see both of you virtually. It's really good to see you.
Yeah.
So I've been at Siler City Pharmacy for the past 17 years as an employee. I actually started as a student pharmacist and spent some time here. But I was able to purchase the pharmacy in 2018. And in addition to owning the pharmacy, I also own a holding company, a real estate company, and also another company that manages healthcare practices. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. And Greco, in case people don't know who you are.
Yeah. So I'm Greco. I'm the senior loan officer and vice president of the pharmacy lending vertical here at Live Oak Bank. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much for both having me. Wonderful to see Angelynn again. And as we talked about in the beginning of the webinar, she and I met back in 2000, and I think it was 2017 or 2018.
It was 17.
Yeah, it was 2017. Yeah, at the NCPA ownership workshop in New Jersey. And that's where we began talking a little bit about what her goals were of acquiring the pharmacy that she worked at, and stayed in contact, and lucky enough, we were able to help finance that. And she's been doing very well, and excited to hear and take a trip down memory lane on how that whole thing went.
Yeah. So let's go into that then. So you mentioned you started working there as a student pharmacist. Maybe just expand on how this all came about here.
Sure. Definitely knew that independent pharmacy was for me. Never in my wildest dreams. If I told you that I thought about owning a pharmacy, that would just totally be a lie, because I had never really thought about that as a student pharmacist, but just really wanted a place where I could plug in and kind of hone my patient clinical skills, and just really take care of the community. But then as time went on, I felt like I had some really great ideas, and the owners at the time, they were receptive to that, but they were always like, okay, Angelynn, you can try this, right? But how's it going to make us money, right? So I have all these great ideas, and some of them, like developing an immunization practice, 17 years ago, that was a really great idea and has been a wonderful, sustainable money maker for our store. But I had all these great ideas, and then it kind of transitioned into, well, I'm doing all this work, and I'm putting in this effort. Could I be a part owner, guys? Like 10%, 25%, right? So there was some conversation and discussion around that, which continually got shut down. Finally, till we got to the place where they said that they wanted to sell me the entirety of the pharmacy instead of just a percentage, basically, of ownership. Yeah.
So how okay, you're a student, you graduate, did these conversations start like a year into it? Was it 5 years?
It was probably about 2.5 to 3 years into it.
Okay, and were you bringing this up, or were the
Yes.
owners bringing you?
They would, I cannot imagine they would have ever brought that up with me.
Okay.
Just because one of them that I think, I mean, it's something that I appreciate more now than I did at the time. Because I'm like, I'm making you this money, I want to reap some of the benefits, right?
Right.
But that just wasn't realized at the time. But they kept telling me, Angelynn, I wasn't even the pharmacy manager at the time. So there was some legwork to be done in that capacity as well, right? But then when I did have opportunity to become the pharmacy manager, I was only in a management sort of role for about 2.5 years before I actually purchased the pharmacy. And they would always tell me, Angelynn, there's a difference between managing the pharmacy and being a staff pharmacist. But I'm doing all the things and I've got the ideas, but that's a very important concept, I think. And then subsequently, they would also tell me there's a big difference between owning the pharmacy and managing the pharmacy. And I now have a better perspective of what that means, but I didn't, but they're right. They're right. And so they put kind of a pause on that. And there's some other financial implications related to that too. Like, how much was I going to need to save as a staff pharmacist? Like, they knew what they were paying me, right out of school here. Have you saved enough to be able to put down that down payment for what's going to be required for the loan? And so, I mean, those are valid things that you need to think about. Like, you may have a hope and a dream that you want to do this, but there's some real cash requirements as well.
Yeah, so I there were several things that came up to me here. So one, you said that they were like, how there's a lot more to owning the store, and they kind of wanted you to be a manager first. I hear this a lot from sellers, like, oh, well, my pharmacist, they're not cut out to buy it. Like, they don't see it. And I think what they mean by that is they don't see their pharmacist like making after hour deliveries, or when it snows and no one can get into the pharmacy, you're like in a Jeep driving around, sliding all over the place. Like, that sounds stupid, but sometimes as an owner, you have to do things that suck. I mean, your goal is to get away from that, but occasionally things go crazy and you just have to it's yours, right? So
you have to man the shit regardless of what happens. You have to come through for your patients. Yeah, absolutely.
So they obviously got comfortable with that. So what in your mind do you think helped with that?
Dare I use the term workaholic? I don't know.
Well, but you're young. I mean, that is, yeah. No,
I mean, I was just very, very devoted, to the store, but also to the patients. And I mean, I think that's the beauty of independent pharmacy and the relationships that we develop with our patients. It's not just the pills in the bottle and the numbers. It is a piece of it, right? But it's also very relational, what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that they saw that. I think something that's interesting about my purchase as well is that the owners were not in the store. Like, they came to visit, but they were not there. It wasn't like I was like staffing with them, or we had shifts that kind of, overlapped or we passed each other, It wasn't like that. They were remote, like an hour or so away,
Yeah. No. So it gave you an opportunity to, on a micro level, like run a store, which is pretty good experience.
Right. So when something happens, like, who do you call? Like, can I depend on her? Go ahead, Greco. Yes.
Angelynn, at the time when they were essentially saying to you, hey, we don't perhaps think you're ready, we need you to have, in essence, a little bit more experience. So obviously you have a passion and you dove right in. At the time, did you feel almost like that was something, did you take it as a challenge, or did you take it as almost like, are they holding me back? Because that's something we hear quite often. And it sounds like you turned it into motivation and a positive. And I'm just curious if you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure, Greco. That's very optimistic perspective that you have on that. I think initially it made me angry. In fact, when I think about it now, it still makes me a little angry. I'm giving all the work and you're reaping the benefits. You hear me on this. And so, but then there's the whole budget piece of that, right? So yeah, I definitely think that, saying in all silliness past the anger, yeah, there's opportunity. If I really want to be here and this is something that I'm really committed to, and I know that they're going to sell eventually,
right?
Do I stick it out? Do I put in the work? Yes. And thankfully it did turn out well. for
And
me.
you can start doing things to prepare. You mentioned saving money. Like, I guess that kind of gets into a bigger topic of like how much money you need to save will depend on what the valuation of the store is,
Mhm.
right? Because then Greco can expand on this a little bit, but like, kind of come out with that budget. So like, as you're waiting, you can start getting your financial situation in place so that you can buy it when they go to sell. So I don't know if, I'm not sure who that question's going to. It's either Greco and Angelynn or one of you, but like, how did you save the dollars and how did the valuation, how did you get into that discussion? Because that can
Go
also.
ahead, Angelynn.
Yeah.
I'll add some color to that. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Angelynn.
Yes, please. So the previous owners told me that I needed to be saving half of my income.
Wow.
And so I didn't save exactly half, but that was my goal, to be able to sock away and save
That's
half
awesome.
of what I was making in order to be able to purchase the pharmacy within, they said maybe it would be 10 to 15 years before they'd be ready to sell, as we were having this, no, you can't become a partner with us discussion. So, I mean, that's what I did. And
Wow.
I think that helped to prepare me well financially, to be able to put, in fact, Greco, I don't know if you remember this, but like I wanted to put down more because I had more cash and I'd been saving. I'm like, no,
Yes,
want
I do
to put
remember
down.
that.
And you're
Yes,
like,
yeah.
no, you can't. And so I don't know if people on the call are familiar with something called a seller note, but that was mandated. And I'm like, no, I do not want to borrow money from these men. Like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not doing this. I want to give you the cash. And Greco's like, no, you cannot do that. So
Well, I'll add some color around that.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to discuss here. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Greco.
Yeah, so yes, I mean, okay, so just to add a little color context to that, Angelynn, she was great. She did have excess cash, which is just amazing, right? And that's what you want to have in a transaction, as someone who does have a little bit of extra cash once they pass the minimum down payment that's required. But one reason why we felt, and I felt, that I didn't want her to completely deplete all of her savings, and why I thought that having a seller note was important, was for two reasons. One is I wanted to make sure that the business, first and foremost, cash flowed and could support the debt with the minimum down payment, and that the 90%, or what ended up being about 80 or 75% of the total loan amount to the bank, was not over leveraged from a debt service ratio. Next, I really wanted to make sure that she had some excess post liquidity in the event that there was any struggles and she needed some extra cash to put into the business, or if she ever needed extra cash to do more expansions. And then finally, I said, I really do think that instead of you putting in more money, let's see if the sellers will carry a little bit of the note. Two-prong, one as a little bit of a risk mitigation to make sure that they had some skin in the game, so that when she did take over, that there was going to be some, checks and balances there with the seller. And then second of all, it also looked good from a bank perspective. And just at the time with, how early on she was in her tenure there at the pharmacy. And so really, I felt that it was, it was an advantageous thing. But yes, I do recall definitely that she was like, I want to put more money in. And I said, look, I'd rather you hold on to your post liquidity. You never know when you're going to need it. And look, there's no prepayment penalties on it. So you can always make extra payments as things go on. And just one other nugget I want to point out to a lot of individuals, because Owen, we work with a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers on your end. And, I think Angelynn's story is very, very common. An individual who's doing a lot of work, they're asking for more of an equity ownership or a pathway to ownership, and they're getting no's. I think two things that I hear from Angelynn's story is, one, you have to stick with it, right? You can't just give up. You have to turn that kind of what you see as a slight chip on the shoulder into motivation. And then two is you have to keep asking for the business. You have to keep engaged with that.
Yeah.
And that was something I was so proud of Angelynn along that way. She's very tenacious. She wanted to have that. And so you have to be able to continue to ask for the business, because the answer is always no unless you ask.
Right. Be persistent. Be persistent. Yes.
Yeah.
I also
And
would say other things when you ask what else you could do to prepare in addition to saving, like I feel like there's 3 sort of core individuals that you need as part of your team if you're going to purchase a pharmacy. And maybe you've covered this on a previous webinar, but you definitely need a good accountant. You need to decide, like, I mean, you can start making, I mean, it may not even be the accountant that your pharmacy is currently using, and that might not be a bad thing, you know? But you need that person on your team, and you can start to make those relationships. And you also, obviously, a lender, a banker, you know, it may not even be the person that's going to finance your loan, but you're going to need that relationship. And it may not be where the bank is, where the cash is currently being deposited for your pharmacy, but you can go ahead, work on making those relationships.
Yeah.
And then also with an attorney. Like, I think those are some things that you can be doing now in order to prepare you for the purchase.
yeah,
And then
Agreed.
can I ask you another question too? So it's like how much do you need to save? Like I told you, the previous owner said save half of what you're making, you should be in good shape. But like as a staff pharmacist, I don't know what the pharmacy is going to be valued at. Like, how would you even go about kind of trying to figure out how much is this pharmacy that I'm just giving it all to, like working so hard at, how much is this thing worth? Like, what are some parameters, I guess, that the individuals could use to kind of gauge that if you don't have access to the books, so to speak?
Owen, you want to take that
yeah.
one?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things. There's a lot of different ways of valuing a pharmacy. Okay. But when you're buying an independent and you're going to operate it, there really is kind of 2 that you got to look at. The first one is a multiple of their EBITDA. So how much profit essentially they make. Okay. And really, you know, Greco mentioned cash flow earlier. That's what we're meaning by that, right? So how much money does the company make? And then there's a multiple of that. Now that'll range from 2 to 3, and in specialty things, it can even get more than that. But you know, you take a multiple, right? And really what you're trying to do is go, okay, this company makes this much money. Here's my debt service, you know, and there has to be room between that, right? You can't have, the company can't make 100,000 and your debt service be 100,000 because you will have no money, right? And so really you're trying to figure out, okay, how much does it make? And then what is that debt service? And there's ratios for that. And going back to your topic, Angelynn, about getting your team in place, like an accountant engaging your bank and talking to them, they can really help structure that deal in a way that it'll allow that cash flow room, and make sure that you're not overpaying for something, because they've got to lend on it. So that's the main criteria, because you're doing this as an investment, right? So you are putting dollars in and you want to get a return on your investment. Otherwise, put your money somewhere else, right? And so there's got to be that kind of room in there. The other thing is that you've got to gauge that against like prescriptions filled, because chains will buy these, right? And they will pay a dollar amount, let's call it $10 per prescription, filled annually. So if you fill 60,000 prescriptions, they'll pay 600,000 plus inventory. Okay. And so you've kind of got to gauge those 2 things and go like, you know, I'm looking at cash flow, like an EBITDA times a multiple plus inventory. Is that lining up a little bit with what a chain would pay?
And I'm so glad that you talked about that, because I think that as a pharmacy manager in your independent, even if you don't have access to the books, you probably know how many scripts you're filling, right? To your point. And I mean, gosh, if you're not managing the inventory or participating in that in some function as a pharmacist, well, you sure you want to buy that pharmacy, right? I don't know how you would be operating in today's world and not inventory values. So.
Right. Yeah. So you can at least know those 2 things. You can kind of get a gauge, and going back to your amount you need to save, you can go, well, that's probably 700,000 or 800,000. I need 10% of that. You know, so I'll probably need 80 and then some working capital. I need $100,000.
Yeah.
Right. And that'll kind of give you an idea of what it will be. But also remember that script, that could be, you know, that's your backup. Right. So let's say you buy that pharmacy and you just don't like it, or something happens and you've got to move or what have you. Well, knowing what the chain's going to pay is at least an easy exit for you in a worst case scenario. Now, obviously, we don't want to do that, but like anytime you make an investment, you want to know what's your worst case scenario. Your worst case scenario is to sell it to the chain, right? And so at least you have that as a gauge as well, and it helps you value that pharmacy a little bit.
Absolutely. And there's a question about like being that I worked for the pharmacy before owning it, if a junior partnership program was ever on the table. And no, it was not. It was an all or nothing with the previous owners.
Yeah.
Which, I actually have to say, sometimes is not the worst thing, because I have heard stories too, where people get stuck in junior partnerships and it's like almost being in purgatory. They'll never be able to really get out of them. And, you're kind of stuck at a 20% or 30% ownership, and then you can never fully become 100%. So that's definitely something that you have to tread. And, I think, Angelynn, in this instance, your sellers were thinking, hey, listen, if we're going to sell this thing, we're going to sell it to 100%. We're not going to give you 1%. And that, I think, varies between sellers and situations, but everybody that's out there that's going to enter into a junior partnership, I think they need to, understand also the parameters in which they're going in, understand what that means in the operating agreement, but then also understand, okay, well, how and when do I ever become 100%, or how do I grow this percentage?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I see that all the time. I was going to say the same thing, Greco, and actually it's for both sides. Like the junior partner, the younger person, like they end up getting 20% of it. And then the older person's like, this is great. I've got this partner that runs the business. I can go on trips. Like I'm making more money. Like I'm just going to ride this out. Right.
Yeah.
And they think that the junior partner is happy because they gave them 20% or they got them in there. Right. And vice versa for the sellers. I see situations where someone thinks they want to own 100% and then they own 25 and they're like, well, this isn't bad. Maybe I'll just stay at 25. And now the seller doesn't have that person they thought was going to buy it. So going back to what Greco says, you have to have some really tough conversations going into that partnership to make sure you're on the same page and that you get it in writing, like in a contract. So hopefully that answers your question.
One thing I remember in the process, Angelynn, was that idea about what the pharmacy is worth and what the asking price or what the sellers will accept. I remember that was always a really moving target for you. And and I think the benchmarks you kind of gave to give people ideas about what they might be looking at is really important, right? Because if a pharmacy is doing, 600 scripts a day, and someone says, oh, I don't have 50,000 saved up, that's going to be probably pretty hard to accomplish as a buyer. And then to Angelynn's point, it's really smart. You do have to then at that point really have a poignant conversation with the banker to understand about how, if you're going to try to buy this, how it could possibly work with the structure and how much money you would need. But Angelynn, how did you actually, what were some of the high level points where the purchase price came and then you began that process? I know with us, obviously we were running the cash flow, but kind of walk us through a little bit of that process when you finally had the sellers come and say, okay, this is what the pharmacy is worth. Was it an initial kind of like, oh my gosh, I thought that was high or low, or how do I validate this? What were some of those steps that you took?
I think initially I was like, well, that seems reasonable. And then it kind of transitioned to, gosh, I've worked really hard to make this pharmacy this valuable. I can't believe I have to pay this for the pharmacy, But then I also was able to, the NCPA Digest has some of those formulas like Owen was mentioning. And when we had to sign paperwork,
non-disclosure.
Thank you for those words, non-disclosure agreements, so that I did have access to the financials over the years. And so I began taking those pieces and crunching my own numbers to determine if it was going to be reasonable, right? But I will say that just going back to my team thought, I didn't have an accountant. All accountants aren't equal, just like all lenders aren't equal. And I wish like if I could impart something to people that are listening today, like that would be my take home message. All accountants are not equal and all lenders are not equal. You want to have someone on your team that understands your industry. And I'm sitting there crunching these numbers from the NCPA digest, going through these financials and talking to you about it, Greco, which was lovely, but it would have been very helpful from like just an assurance perspective on my part that like this pharmacy is really worth this.
Yeah.
You know? So that those are my reflections related to that process. Yeah.
No, which is great advice, because it's always hindsight when you've done it, when you look back, you know, when you're getting into it, you're like, can I afford that? Should I spend the dollars on that? You know, but you know, a lot of times that's worth every dollar if you hire the right people or get people on your team that can collaborate and talk through things. It's amazing how often Greg and I will find things that the other didn't find because we're collaborating or what have you. So
Well, and the pharmacy industry is so fluid too, right? What was in 2018 is not what it is today, right? And I think that speaks a lot to, you know, if you have experience in the pharmacy and you understand the business and you understand some opportunities that might not be realized, you do have to balance out a little bit about when you are implementing those on the seller's behalf, because then you're going to have to pay for that growth. And those are things that could be in your back pocket that you're going to hold on to when you take ownership for to help grow the business. So it is a very careful balance, you know, just like everything, there's two sides. There's two sides to the, you know, a benefit of being an employee at a business that you're going to buy as you know it, and you have an existing relationship with the sellers. The other side of it is you're an employee, and, you know, your expectations sometimes can be to do these things that will help the business grow. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
But you did eventually get a deal and structured a deal and got the financing, right? And I assume that it was structured. So we had a loan, we had a seller note, you put in some cash. I assume we got working capital as well.
Yes, let me tell you about that too. This extra working capital, I also did not want to borrow that. And
I remember
no one ever does.
I'm like, I don't want this money. Like, who turns down money? But I'm like, I don't want this. I don't need this. It will cash flow. But I must say, in retrospect, I am thankful for the additional funds, Greco. Like that was needed. So to that, all lenders are not equal. Thank you for having the foresight to know that that was what was going to be needed. Even though it sat untouched for years, there came a season where it was needed.
Yeah. And that's something that, you know, we have that conversation often, especially, you know, it's interesting. We have that conversation a lot with the individuals who do work at the stores, more often, I think, than the ones that don't. And I think a lot of that, and I think a lot of it is too, because, you know, they're seeing the inventories, are seeing the purchases. And so when they see a larger number of working capital there, they're kind of like, I don't think we need that much. And you know, it's always easier to have it in the beginning than to have to come back and get it after it's all been said and done. And so, but, you know, I think that's a healthy, you know, for one, I'll say it's a healthy debate to have, because it facilitates, for one, it shows the lender that, you know, the person is actually looking at what they're taking out and being prudent about how much debt they're taking. And then the other thing it does is it really gives an individual an opportunity to almost interview the lender on why are you doing this? Like, why are we having so much? And if the lender has a lot of experience with pharmacies, they should be able to explain to them about why that much working capital is needed. And so, you know, I saw it as an opportunity to have a healthy discussion with our borrower. And I actually also saw it as, hey, she's being conscious about how much money she's taking out. She doesn't want to over leverage this business. And that was all, you know, those are all fine details to have. At the end, I'm glad that, you know, we all got it worked out, and you're very welcome. And I'm just, you know, happy that it did come in handy when needed.
Can I ask you a question, Greco? Like, do you look at, like, I guess, individuals that are applicants differently? Or is there some sort of like fitness of your prospective client that you take into account when they work at the pharmacy versus they don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so one is, as a bank, we obviously we look at all applicants equal, but I think what we're doing there is you're saying almost like, hey, if someone is working at a pharmacy, what qualitative factors do they need to have in order to be a good fit as an owner? And I think, some of that, and these are where these coaching opportunities come, where, if an individual is coming to us and they don't have a lot of experience managing because perhaps the pharmacist, the owner, is in there doing it alongside them, and they are a little bit more on, kind of being like, okay, here's the, not given the responsibility to make decisions themselves, basically. We will encourage them to do things like study up, attend ownership workshops. Owen, I know your group offers a great boot camp as well. And just to get really familiar with not only how the business operates, but also that idea about being a manager, how to get employees, motivate employees, handle some of those things. And Angelynn, I think you were just in a very unique spot where the sellers weren't there, they were remote. So you were essentially in there working as the owner, treating it as your own. And I would say if everybody doesn't have that situation, then you should try as best you can to take on more responsibilities, figure out other types of ways to educate yourself on how the business operates and how it makes money.
It helps to face those challenges and to try to address them, because you learn so much in that process. And if you just like leave it for the owner or leave it for the pharmacist manager to figure out, then you'll never learn those things.
Yeah, and no, I agree with that. And one of the things we see is like as you go through the buying process, you learn a lot about the person buying, because I hear a lot, like, let's say due diligence, for example. Like if you're buying a store that you don't know anything about, your diligence is going to be pretty comprehensive. But like when they work there, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't really need to do any diligence, I work there. Well, maybe it's less, but you still need to do it, because this is where we start, like to you said, Greg, is getting the education, right? Like, have you ever looked at your top 100 from a profitability standpoint, like drugs, or your top 50 payers from a profitability standpoint? Have you ever, looked at health benefits and what that's costing you, and whether you should move from 50 to 50 to 60/40 and all these different things, right? So like I'm curious about the process, Angelynn. Like, how long did it take you to buy? What level of diligence did you do? I think you learn a lot about what you don't know through that process.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Owen. And I will say that there was a good amount of transparency between myself and the previous owners. But as it relates to even like healthcare, like that stuff is expensive. Benefits for your oh my gosh. Right. Payroll. I'd never processed a payroll before. That wasn't even happening on location, and the expense that's associated with that. But I didn't have any perspective about what that cost until I was asking for quotes for those things, until I was signing up to actually do it. And that was part of the diligence process, I suppose. But you can't start that
it was
early, Owen. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't really.
Yeah. There's some things I think that new owners, whether you work at a pharmacy or not, I think there's some things that are just you're going to have to learn by trial by fire, right? You're going to have to just kind of get in there and do it. Most likely the seller, if you're working at a pharmacy, most likely they're not going to have you processing payroll, or they're not going to have you, going out to get quotes on things, that's something that you're going to have to do yourself. And that's part of that, drinking from a fire hose type of thing when you become an owner. But I do think there are some things like Angelynn, I remember in the store, when I came and visited you, you were working in the store, you could tell that you had a very, you knew the employees, what their roles were. You had kind of a say over the scheduling. You had a say over who was doing what. You had a really good idea about some of the services that you were providing to the providers, and you were essentially kind of their point of contact with that. I think those are many things that if you're working in a pharmacy today, those are things. Angelynn, you mentioned purchasing inventory, being involved with the inventory control. I think those are little things that you can do today to start to get a grasp about what that feels like. And then there's going to be some things that really come down to, figuring it out on your own, but also forming that relationship with the seller to help you through that transition. And Angelynn, it was just one of those things where she was having that conversation for many years on, hey, I want to become an owner. I want to become an owner. And then they eventually said, okay, yeah, you can. So I think it was just maintaining that. It's about maintaining that relationship with the seller and continuing to ask for a little bit more, but always the careful balance about not asking for too much, because then, how does that impact your future goal?
Yeah, I have two questions coming off of that. Is one, how long did it take you to actually buy it from the time you agreed on a price to buying it? Was it 3 months, 6 months?
Oh gosh. Oh, and I thought it was just going to be a couple months and we were going to seal the deal and we'd go to closing and there you'd have it. But it was probably more like Greco, an 8-month spread by the time we really got all of our I's dotted and T's crossed.
Yeah, I think from the time that we essentially kind of said, okay, let's buy this thing, the seller said, okay, let's buy it. Yeah, and there was a lot of things with that. I think a lot of it had to do with getting the seller and the buyer aligned on the structure of the transaction and really making sure that everything was there. And then I believe there was also a little bit of a hiccup with regards to the actual real estate, right?
Real estate, that's a whole nother topic probably for another day, to buy the real estate or not, if that's an option.
Yeah,
right?
I think that caused a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
And then continued dialogues with the sellers. But overall, I thought that it was it was a pretty, for the most part, we handled the curveballs very well, I think, because of the relationship that was there with the sellers.
And I think a big thing there is it's just that I think people think, like Angelynn, you thought it's going to be a couple months, but these are big transactions and they can be complicated and there can be moving parts. And for one person, it may be, part of their retirement. For the other person, it's a big decision in their life. So so it's going to take a little bit of time. This isn't a quick thing a lot of times. And so I think that's important. And then Greco mentioned transitioning. What was that like? I mean, you and I talked briefly about, okay, one day I'm PIC, the next day I'm owning this thing. How does the dynamic with your employees change? How did your role change? Can you kind of maybe give us some examples there?
I wish I could say, oh, and I just walked in the next day after we closed and I'm like, I own this thing. I'm going to sit in the back now, take it all in and watch everybody work. But that's not what happened at all. And I'll say, gosh, after closing, that's when I thought it was an adventure as we were going through the process, but the real adventure begins after you close, because there's so many other moving pieces and parts that I just wasn't involved with, even as the manager, whether that payroll was something that we talked about, receiving third-party payments, it's cash flow. I was never involved with that. And I've checked, the bank accounts for the pharmacy more than I've ever checked accounts for anything in my life. You have to get on top of those things, and that's something you have to expect the day after you sign the paperwork, right? Or after you sign the loan documents. You have to pay sales tax, but some of the things that I'm talking about, if you partner with the right accountant, they're going to help you and not let you fail during the transition sort of process, if you will. I know one of my secrets to success after the transition was really having a dedicated office manager that I could say, hey, today, these are the hot topics, this is do or die. You've got to help me do this, because I'm not sitting in the back taking it all in. I'm benching out there, but there's some things that are hair on fire. We've got to accomplish this today. And not trying to be elusive about what those things are, but definitely would be cash flow, changing over insurance contracts, third-party payments, that type thing could be a little sticky and must DEA certificates, Board of Pharmacy to get your permit, those type of things. You have to handle those very carefully. But having somebody in the office that can help you do those things was definitely a key to our success.
And did you deputize somebody in that role that wasn't previously in that role, or was that person there already?
She was my previous office manager, right?
Uh-huh.
That literally made the deposits like to the
Right.
bank. Like that was her role basically, right?
Okay.
And to send all of the stuff that needed to be done, bill payment, payroll transmittals onto the owners, right? So she had a perspective of what was going on. We just had never really been on the back end to seal the deal, you know?
Okay.
So she had a really good perspective. It wasn't all new for her.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I think that goes to speak to forming the team internally. You know, we talk about forming the team externally. That's also making sure that you have good team members internally.
Yeah. And Owen, you would ask like, well, what happens? Like, how do you prepare your staff members for this? Gosh, I've received so many schools of thought on you should do this, you shouldn't do this. Like, do you tell them how far in advance do you tell them? Do you tell them the day that you, I mean, everybody probably would have a different opinion.
Everyone will have a different opinion. Our experience has been try not to tell them until the last possible minute, because that way you as the new owner can control the message. See, if you tell them like a month out and then you're not there every day, that rumors start flying, people are looking for jobs, like things can just go awry. And so, you know, though it is a surprise, you can then control the message and they see that things continue, like customers keep coming in and like they still are working, like they get calm pretty quick. But that can be a pretty big shift when you're you're the manager and now you're the owner. It's like this fear of, oh wow, oh no, it's an owner, now they can like actually let me go.
Yeah.
And so
I did not abide by your principles, and I discussed with my staff what was happening, especially after, I mean, like they know what I'm doing. I'm running reports and they're, you know, that I haven't maybe run before. I'm needing them to help me get some inventory things tight, you know, before. And Greco came for a site visit. That was a good one. I was just reflecting earlier. I'm like, Greco, what am I supposed to say when do you have to come? Like, what
I know. I remember we kind of had to do it a little secretly, but I also, if I remember correctly, and everybody's situation is a little bit different, right, on how you want to handle that dialogue. But if I remember correctly, Angelynn, the staff was pretty happy for you to, I mean, they were like cheering for you to become the owner, right? I mean, not that they were unhappy with the sellers, but they really, I mean, I think they saw you as that right choice. And so they were really much behind it.
I'm very thankful for that, Greco. But I mean, your staff knows, they know who does the work. They know who slacks off. They know who gets by. Even if you're not the person that's signing their payroll check, right? They know who puts in the work at the pharmacy. And so if you're not that person and you'd like to purchase a pharmacy, may I highly suggest that you do everything that you can. Be faithful in the small things to become that person that's the team leader. You know, just because you sign a paycheck doesn't mean you just get to slip out or not be as dedicated to the team mission as you previously were.
That's great advice. Lead by example.
Yeah, well, it's interesting though, as you become an owner, that gets harder to do because you are dealing with cash flow and renewing licenses and paying bills, and you're in charge of the ordering, you're in charge of like everything, right? Paying taxes, payroll taxes, doing your business taxes, like there's all this other stuff, so it becomes harder to lead, and like it's a bigger job. So you know, that transition is difficult, and I think people think it will be easier than what it actually is.
But I think that's opportunity too, Owen. I mean, I don't want to say like it's opportunity to weed out some of the weaker team members, but it definitely is. Like you have to have a strong team. Like if someone's pulling somebody along because they've worked there for 10 or 15 years, I mean, you have to handle that very carefully, right? Or maybe they've worked there even longer than that, you know? But you have to have a strong team that's going to be able to take care of your patients so that you can step out and go pay the taxes or renew. You know, you can be missing, but you're missing, your presence can be missing from the pharmacy and they still function.
But every owner's team may be different. So just because someone was good under one person doesn't mean they're good under the other,
Correct.
right? Like I always tell this story about my dad and his partner, Tim, right? Like they each ran a different store. And my dad was really good at like day-to-day operations, like running things really lean. Tim was really good at growing businesses. So they decided to flip-flop stores in order to have one grow and one be more lean.
How'd that work?
And they hated each other's staff.
Funny.
And yet they were all really good staff. So they had to move stores. So just the different personalities, right? And
Sure.
how you delegate things and use people, it's going to differ. So that's really good. We do have a few questions that are out there. So I do want to leave a little bit of time. I don't know if you've got anything, other words of wisdom that you want to add, Angelynn.
I would just, I would just like to close with ask questions, like advocate for yourself, ask your accountant questions, ask the lender questions. Greco mentioned something about like, it's a good time to like interview the lender. Like, yes, you definitely want to receive something from them, but the more questions that you ask, even if it seems like a stupid question, like ask and be open to learning from that. Because I'm so thankful for the partnership that I've had with IRX. I wish I had known about you sooner than I did. But I had a wonderful partnership with Live Oak to get started. And I'm so thankful for all the time that they've taken to answer the questions that I have. And I still have questions as a pharmacy owner. And I view IRX, like you guys are my partner in helping me run my business. And it's so, like you talked about, like you want to have somebody you can talk to and communicate with. And you guys are that rock from a financial perspective for my pharmacy. So just ask questions and work on developing those relationships with your key team members that you're going to need to move forward.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Hey, Owen, I have to hop
I was
off
going to
here,
say
but do you want to take some of the lender specific questions? I can answer them really quickly and then.
Yeah. So there was one about curious what working capital was ultimately used to, and are you willing to share? I think better maybe would be, Greco, to say, how was working capital maybe calculated? Or what's like I know that can be a little bit complicated, but what's the high level, like how much, hey, your deal's $1 million, like how much should you have?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, every deal structure is going to be a little bit different if you're purchasing receivables or if you're not. But essentially, the goal of the working capital and why a store should be properly capitalized and maybe even, what might be perceived as overcapitalized is because, those third-party receivables, which is what is kind of like, 90% of how the pharmacy is going to get paid. They're going to take typically, depending on the payer, whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, or commercial, anywhere between, 0 to 30 days, right? On average, could be 14 days, maybe 21 days. But that money's outstanding. It shows on a receivable report, but you haven't received it in the bank account. And especially during a transition, those payments are going to be coming to the seller's bank account. So you have to have a receivable, you have to have a reconciliation period set up. That working capital that's in your bank balance, banking account from the bank proceeds is really going to serve as a bucket of money while you're waiting on this period, because you're going to continue to have to purchase drugs, continue to have to make payroll. And, if there is ever a break in that cycle, that working capital is there to serve to help pay the things as the receivables are coming in from the bucket. And typically you want to have anywhere between, 21 to 30 days of working capital to do that. And the goal should always be that some of it gets used, but then some of it's getting replaced by the receivables coming in. And so then you should have, a healthy amount of it left over on the balance sheet. And obviously, if you're good with your money and you're smart with your money, like Angelynn is it'll sit there for a while, and you won't need it until that rainy day comes. But then, most likely it came just for everybody. It always does. And you have it there to use. So it's a really good thing.
Yeah, good. And then the last finance one was what key points taken into consideration by an SBA loan officer?
Well, first of all, you need to make sure that the bank that he or she is working for has an experience with doing SBA loans. So that loan officer needs to understand the SBA loan process because it can be a little bit unique, and they need to really make sure that they're walking you through all the ins and outs of the rules and regulations so that you can be properly preparing for how the transaction is going to get done. The next thing is, because we're in the pharmacy space, and it's a very niche space, I would say you want to make sure that they have some experience doing pharmacy loans and that they have some experience working in the industry, because it's not just so much about punching in the numbers. I mean, most bankers can go ahead and read a profit and loss and a balance sheet and talk about KPIs. But really, when it gets down to it, is how does the pharmacy make money? What things do you need to watch out for? And what are some of the things that are going to be making you successful in the industry? And if you don't have a lot of experience in that working in the industry, it's going to be difficult to really guide a borrower through that. And then, of course, you're mixing in the SBA and the finance side. And finally, like Angelynn said, someone who's going to be willing to really hold your hand, walk you through the roadmap of how this is going to work. You should never feel rushed, because this is probably going to be the single largest asset that you're going to invest in next to your personal home. And, you want that partner there that's going to be there from the beginning on through the process and then at the end. And, you have to work with someone that has comfort in that. So.
Yeah, great. Well, Greco, thanks for getting on. I can probably handle the rest of these. There are some really good questions, so I am going to try to finish off and answer the rest of these. So,
thanks everybody, and I look forward to hearing from you. And Angelynn, congratulations on all your success. And Owen, thanks a lot for having me again.
Oh yeah, see you, Greco.
Thanks.
So along the lines of just working capital and all that, someone asked, so for a pharmacy listed at 1.2 million, how much would a bank expect the buyer should put down? And in order to fund the loan, how much working capital on the loan is such as this? So typically when these are listed, it's listed as 1.2 million plus inventory. So let's say the inventory is 200,000, just to use easy numbers. We have 1.2 million plus 200,000, that's 1.4 million. That's, if it's a $1.2 million store, that's a pretty big store. So it's probably going to need like 300,000 in working capital. Again, we'd have to look at a lot there to like understand truly what that is, but just from my experience, that's what it's going to be. So we're looking in this case like a $1.7 million acquisition. So then you as the buyer would need to put in 170,000 at a minimum. So that's how that would get kind of structured, and there'd probably be a seller note involved in a transaction that large. And some other questions: when estimating the pharmacy valuation, what percentage of generic and brand sales contribute to the business is better? That's a difficult question. I'm not really concerned with the generic versus brand. I'm concerned with what those drugs are and whether or not they're profitable, because there's a lot of brands that are not. And there's also some brands that are super profitable that I highly doubt will continue. And so we like to see what those are and how much of the profit it's making up. And same goes on the generic side. So we're not necessarily looking for a percentage of business, but more what they are, in particular on the brand side. See what key points taken. Let's see. Do you have websites to know pharmacies that are listed for sale? Yeah, there's a ton of them. Yes, there's a absolute ton of them. A lot of, and some of those are not good. I would also, but for the amount that you see online, there's probably triple the amount that aren't online. My biggest recommendation for finding a store to sell is 1, network with owners. 2, network with people in the industry. So get involved with CPSN, get involved with NCPA, talk to RX ownership from McKesson or pharmacy transitions from Cardinal or Amerisource. Like, get to know these people, come to the ownership workshop, because pharmacy is a small world. We all kind of know each other. Like when we go to a conference, like if Angelynn and I are sitting there talking, we will run into 15 other people we know, right? And so like everyone knows each other. So that's how deals are done. So that's probably the better way of going about it. Like invest your time into going to and getting to know some of these people.
But what I would say sometimes too, like your wholesaler, especially if
Yeah.
you use more of like a regional wholesaler and you're interested in purchasing
Yep.
in your area, sometimes they kind of have a good pulse on that as well.
Yeah, like in North Carolina, Mutual Drug has a really good pulse on what's going on in the area. And like McKesson has RX ownership. Their whole job is to find out what stores are for sale. And they want to get you a new owner in there. And their whole goal is to keep it from selling to CVS.
Right.
And Amerisource and Cardinal have similar groups. So like get out and meet these people. Like they want to talk to you. So yeah. How much time did it take to receive third-party Medicaid and Medicare payments? Forever, right, Angelynn? Well,
Well,
to
I
get it
think
moved to your
also
name, I guess.
if you're right. So I think that we didn't really address this, but it definitely would depend on whether you had an asset or a stock purchase.
Yes,
That can
true.
influence the time that it would take to receive those payments. Correct, Owen?
That
think it
is
would.
correct. We did not
Yeah.
address this, stock versus asset. Yeah, so in a stock sale, what that is when you buy the stock of the company. So the company stays around. So you inherit the liabilities. You also inherit the assets, which include the receivables. So the third party payments. So the day you buy it, if a check comes, it's yours. Right. So a stock sale can be good, especially if you're working in the store and like, there's no fraud or, major issues. And in some areas like heat zones, you have to do a stock sale. So in that case, you might buy accounts receivable. And also when you go to redo the licenses in many states, the state license will stay the same, the DEA will stay the same, and thus your insurance contracts will stay the same. You do have to do a change of information and change of ownership still, but it's a lesser, it'll take less time. Now in an asset sale, you are a whole new corporation. So you have to go get all new state license, all new DEA, all no insurance contracts. Now you will operate under a power of attorney. So there'll be no gap in getting your payments. It's just that the payments will go to the seller and they'll have to transfer them to you. That process to get it all into your name, that can take 90, 120 days. In California, it can even be longer. And so, that can take a period of time. And you should write that all into your purchase agreement to make sure that the seller's cooperating there. Let's see. And then does Angelynn fire or reducing the hours of employees to improve cash flow? I don't know if you've done that or not.
I have fired some employees and it has definitely improved my cash flow.
Okay.
Previously, when I alluded to like, you can't just keep dragging along people that are not meeting the requirements that you have set for them. Yes, it will increase, store morale, productivity, and ultimately it improves your bottom line. Yes, sometimes that is necessary. And yeah, I mean, for some of my part-time employees, sometimes I have had to reduce hours in order to meet budget, but it's hard. Those are very difficult conversations to have.
Yeah, and you've got to also not only with the person, but also with the rest of the team so that they understand why it's being, and so that they're not scared for their jobs and et cetera. But the reality is there's only 3 levers in a pharmacy. You can gain more revenue, you can buy better, or you can reduce payroll. Like the rest of it is like, if you look at all of your expenses combined, payroll will be like double. And so like it's your biggest expense. So controlling that and keeping it both not too low, but also not too high. I mean, that is a constant, unfortunate thing that you have to do as an owner, that you have to kind of look at that stuff and move things around and make sure that you have the right team members in the right seats and at the right hours and so forth. And unfortunately, that is part of it. I think every owner goes through that probably every couple of years where they have to move things around.
It's like a puzzle, and the pieces have to all fit together beautifully in order for the outcome to be a good thing. But I will say that your team there at IRX as well, Owen, is like the KPI kind of indicators and some of the dashboards that I receive on a weekly basis. I mean, it's helpful for some perspective related to that. And just, yeah, sometimes I have been overstaffed, and your team is not afraid to tell me that as well. Your payroll, Angelynn, get it in check. Right?
Yeah,
They don't.
well, that's a lot easier to do when you're not emotionally invested in the people.
But it helps. But I guess what I'm saying by that one is that helps to have some outside perspective as well, right?
Well, I agree.
To help you.
Yep. No. I totally. I mean,
those.
we even with our pharmacies, like, you know, it's a lot easier to tell someone else where they stand than it is to look at it yourself. So, I mean, we even have outside people look at our stores to go, are we doing something stupid? Because like sometimes you get emotionally attached to like the people, right?
They're
and
your
the
people, of course you do, Owen.
Yeah, and well, and you don't sit back and think, and like it's great. Again, going back to your team, you've got to have that team, and you've got to have people who will tell you the honest truth, even if it hurts, right? And so
and even if you don't agree, especially initially, you still need to have that team that you can rely on.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. And then part of that is like, you know, that is part of the conversation is like, hey, I disagree. And here's why. And like having that conversation back and forth so that you can figure out, you know, what is the right decision. You know, and it's all about making good decisions, and your team can help you make educated and informative good decisions.
Right.
So yeah. Why don't pharmacies include inventory and purchase price? So I don't know if that 1.2 million is including inventory. Sometimes they do. It is standard in the industry to go a purchase price plus inventory. That is just the standard in the industry. So most of the time when you see something online, it'll say like 700,000 plus inventory. That is just kind of the standard, but always ask the question. I was just trying to give an example. That's just how that works. And then in terms of what we charge, we offer a lot of different things. So that would be hard for me to kind of go into on this webinar. So if you want to set up a call and we can talk about your specific situation, we can talk. I'm not shying away from price. We're happy to give prices out. I just have no idea like what you need. And so I would be quoting randomly. So
Connect with Owen and his team. They will fill you in and tell you about all the things that they offer and how much. I have to say, Owen, related to that too, like it was like sticker shock a little bit when I realized what the monthly fee was going to be. I also remember a promise from your team, and that like, Angelynn, like I guarantee you we're worth it. Like you will get this back in the tax preparation. I don't know if I'm going over time, but like
no, it's
the
fine.
tax planning that your team offers, like the monthly fee that you pay to them, like you will receive that back, especially if you've been working with an accountant that doesn't understand the pharmacy industry. They're worth it.
We do try to do that, and I think most good partners of yours will try to, you know, earn get you a return on investment. I mean, you know, we're small business owners as well, so we understand what's happening. So I appreciate that, Angelynn. That's great. And I'm putting I'm putting our contact information in here, and I think that we'll be wrapping things up. And you can also reach us on LinkedIn. You can reach Greco on LinkedIn as well. If you put them out there, that's one of the best ways to reach all of us. So thank you for your time, Angelynn. Really appreciate it. Hopefully, I know I learned something, and this was great. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks, Owen. Appreciate it. Good luck to all you future pharmacy owners out there.
And I am sure we'll talk to you soon. See you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.